The air was thick with dust and smoke as Zara stumbled through the crowded marketplace. Her wrists were bound with metal cuffs, the edges cutting into her skin. She could feel the burning mark on her arm, a symbol of ownership, a cruel brand forced upon her by the warlord's men. It was still fresh, raw, and painful. People around her sneered and whispered, their eyes full of pity or disgust. But most of them just ignored her, pretending not to see her suffering. Slaves were nothing but property on this harsh, lawless planet ruled by the brutal warlord called Gorgel the Cruel. 2 guards dragged Zora through the market, their hands gripping her arms like iron clamps. She tried to fight them, but her strength was gone. Days without food or rest had turned her limbs weak, her head dizzy. "Stop struggling, girl," one of the guards growled. "You're lucky you're still alive." Zora bit her lip, her eyes burning with anger and shame. She had been free once, living with her family far from the warlord's territory. But Gorgel's raiders came, destroying everything. They took her parents and her little brother. They took her too. Now she was nothing but a branded slave. Property, no better than livestock. They threw her into a rusty metal cage at the edge of the market, her body hitting the cold floor with a thud. The cage door slammed shut, the lock clicking into place. "Get comfortable," the guard sneered. "You're not going anywhere." Zora pushed herself up and glared at the guard, but he only laughed and walked away. She reached for her branded arm, her fingers shaking as she traced the ugly symbol scorched into her skin. The pain was sharp, but not as sharp as the hatred building inside her. She looked around. There were other cages nearby, filled with prisoners who looked just as hopeless as she felt. No one dared to speak. No one dared to fight. The warlord's power was too strong. But then she heard something. Whispers. "Have you heard?" One prisoner murmured to another. "A human arrived yesterday. A stranger from the stars. A human." The other asked, his voice trembling, "What's so special about him?" "He's not afraid of Gorgel's men," the first prisoner replied. "They say he walked right into the warlord's territory like he owned the place, and he's looking for something, or someone." Zora's eyes widened. A human. Here, on this hellish planet. Humans were rare and mostly stayed away from this part of the galaxy, and if one was here, willingly stepping into Gorgel's domain, it had to be someone powerful or completely insane. But why would a human come here? Was he just another slaver? Another monster looking to profit from misery? Zara clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She refused to believe that anyone could be foolish enough to challenge the warlord's power. And even if someone tried, what difference would it make? Yet, as the night dragged on and darkness covered the marketplace, Zora couldn't stop thinking about the human stranger. About the possibility, however small, that maybe, just maybe, someone had come to help. Her hope was a flickering candle, weak and barely there. But it was better than nothing. Curling up on the cold floor of her cage, Zora let herself dream of freedom. But she knew dreams could be cruel. Tomorrow, the guards would come again. Tomorrow, the pain would continue. But tonight, she would allow herself to believe. The marketplace was alive with noise and chaos. Traders barked out prices, metal clanged against metal, and the sour smell of sweat and desperation hung heavy in the air. Zora curled up in the corner of her cage, her body aching, her stomach twisted with hunger. She could feel her branded skin pulsing with pain. It was a constant reminder of what she was now. Nothing but property. But something was different today. There was a tension in the air, a restlessness she couldn't quite place. Zora's eyes scanned the crowd from behind the rusted metal bars, trying to make sense of it. That's when she saw him. He walked through the market like he owned the place, a tall, broad-shouldered human with a face hardened by survival, but eyes that burned with something else. Determination. His clothes were practical, dark, and slightly worn, but clean. He didn't look like a slaver. He didn't look like anyone Zora had seen before. People moved out of his way. some out of fear, some out of curiosity. But he paid them no mind. His gaze was sharp, sweeping over the cages, the slaves, the guards, searching for something, or someone. Zara shrank back, her fingers tightening around the cold metal bars of her cage. What was a human doing here? Was he some sort of mercenary? An arms dealer looking for fresh labor to sell to Gorgle? But as the man's gaze swept over her cage, his eyes locked onto hers. Zara's breath caught in her throat. There was something strange in his expression, something that looked a lot like concern. "Hey, you!" a guard snapped, stepping forward to block the human's path. "You can't just wander around here like you own the place. This is Gorgle's territory." The man's gaze flickered to the guard, calm and cold. "And who exactly is Gorgle to me?" His voice was low, steady, powerful. The guard sneered. "He's the one who decides whether you leave here alive, human. Now get lost before I have you dragged away like the rest of this trash." The man's jaw tightened, but his eyes never wavered. "I'm looking for someone. A girl. She was taken by Gorgle's men about a week ago." "Ah, you think you can just stroll in here and make demands?" The guard barked out a harsh laugh. "You're either stupid or suicidal. Either way, you won't find her. She's probably already branded and sold off." Branded. The man's eyes darkened, a flash of anger cutting through his calm expression. "Where do you keep them?" The guard crossed his arms, grinning like he was enjoying the conversation. "Why? Thinking of buying yourself a slave? Thought humans had more sense than to mess with Gorgle's merchandise. I'm not here to buy anyone." The man's voice was ice. "I'm here to free them." The guard's laughter died, replaced by something uglier. "Free them? You really are insane. You think you can just walk in here and—" The man moved so fast, Zora barely saw it. One moment he was standing still. The next, his fist collided with the guard's face, sending him sprawling to the ground with a sickening thud. Gasps rose from the crowd, eyes wide with disbelief. "Anyone else?" the man asked, his gaze sweeping over the stunned guards. None of them moved. He stepped over the unconscious guard's body and walked straight to Zora's cage. His eyes met hers again, and for a moment, Zora couldn't breathe. "Are you Zora?" he asked, his voice quieter now, but no less firm. Zora's throat felt dry. How did this stranger know her name? Why was he even here? She wanted to speak, to ask him what kind of cruel trick he was playing. But the hope that flickered in her chest was too strong to ignore. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm Zora." The man glanced at the lock on her cage, his expression tightening. "Hold on. I'm getting you out of here." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, sleek and metallic, humming with energy. Zora's eyes widened as he aimed it at the lock. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" The man's lips curled into a grim smile. "Name's Jack, and I'm the guy who's going to tear this place apart if they try to stop me." Before Zora could respond, a sudden shout erupted from the crowd. The guards were closing in, weapons drawn and eyes blazing with fury. Jack's gaze snapped toward them, his eyes narrowing. "Looks like things just got interesting." And then the battle began. The air exploded with chaos. Guards shouted orders and civilians scattered like frightened insects. Zara's hands gripped the bars of her cage, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. Jack stood his ground, calm but alert, his eyes cold and calculating. The guards formed a tight circle around him, their blasters aimed at his chest. One of them, a bulky alien with blue-scaled skin and tusks protruding from his jaw, stepped forward. His voice was a low growl. "You've made a big mistake, human," he sneered. "You think you can take on Gorgle's men by yourself." "Not by myself," Jack replied, his voice casual, almost mocking. "But I wasn't planning on leaving alone, either." The guard's eyes narrowed, clearly not understanding. But Jack didn't give him time to think. He moved with a speed Zora hadn't thought possible, his hands flashing toward the device on his wrist. Suddenly, A blinding flash of light erupted from Jack's wrist device, followed by a powerful pulse of energy that slammed into the guards like a hurricane. They were thrown backwards, their bodies hitting the ground with heavy, painful thuds. Gasps and screams rippled through the crowd. Zara's own gasp was lost in the noise. What kind of weapon was that? She'd never seen anything like it. Whatever it was enough to send a clear message. Jack wasn't playing around. He dropped to one knee in front of her cage, his fingers moving quickly over the lock. The strange device in his hand glowed with a faint blue light, humming softly as he aimed it at the metal. "This'll only take a second," Jack said, his tone steady. "Then we need to get out of here before more of Gorgle's men show up." The lock snapped open with a sharp click. Zara stared at him, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "You don't even know me." Jack's gaze met hers, a seriousness in his eyes that sent a chill down her spine. "I know enough. I know you're a prisoner. I know you've been branded like an animal. And I know no one deserves that." Zara's throat tightened. His words sounded genuine, but she couldn't afford to trust so easily, not after everything she'd been through. "Come on," Jack urged, his hand reaching out toward her. "I can't free everyone here. Not yet. But I can free you. If you want to stay and rot in this cage, fine. But if you want a chance to fight back, then get up and move." Zara stared at his hand, her thoughts a tangled mess. Fear, doubt, anger, hope, all clashing inside her. She had spent so long believing that escape was impossible, that freedom was nothing more than a cruel dream. But now, that dream was standing right in front of her, his hand stretched out in a desperate offer. Before she could change her mind, she grabbed his hand and pulled herself to her feet. Her legs trembled, but she forced them to move. Jack nodded with approval and gestured for her to follow. They moved quickly through the chaotic marketplace, slipping between stalls and dodging groups of terrified civilians. The guards were still scattered, groaning and disoriented from Jack's attack. But Zara knew more would come, and soon. "Where are we going?" Zara asked, struggling to keep up with Jack's brisk pace. "Somewhere safe," he replied without looking back. "I've got a ship parked a few miles from here. We make it there, we're off this planet." His words sounded like salvation, but Zara couldn't ignore the pit of dread growing in her stomach. "Why are you helping me?" she demanded. "What's in it for you?" Jack glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I've got a problem with people who think they can own others, and I'm not leaving this rotten planet until I've done something about it." "But why me?" Zara pressed. "Why not help the others?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Because I can't save everyone. Not yet. But if I start with you, maybe there's hope for the rest." They turned down a narrow alley, the noise of the marketplace fading behind them. For a moment, it was just the two of them, their footsteps echoing against the cracked stone walls. "Do you even have a plan?" Zara asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Or are you just hoping this works out?" Jack shot her a crooked grin. "I always have a plan, just not always a good one." Suddenly, a shadow loomed ahead of them. Zara's breath caught as she realized they weren't alone. Blocking their path was a massive alien, towering over both of them with armor covering his chest and arms like slabs of iron. His eyes were cold and hungry. Well, the alien rumbled. "Looks like I just found myself a fresh bounty." Jack's expression hardened. "Move," he ordered, his voice like steel. The alien laughed, the sound like rocks grinding together. "Move? Oh, you misunderstand, human. I'm here to collect. Gorgle pays well for troublemakers like you, and even better for runaway slaves." His gaze shifted to Zara, and his lips twisted into a cruel smile. "Especially branded ones." Zara's blood turned to ice. She'd heard about bounty hunters like this one. Ruthless, merciless. Jack's fingers clenched around the device on his wrist. "You have 3 seconds to walk away," he said, his tone calm but deadly. or I'll make sure you never walk again." The alien's laugh echoed through the alley. "I'd like to see you try." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Your funeral." And then, without another word, the fight began. The air thickened with tension as Jack lunged forward, his wrist device blazing with energy. The alleyway erupted with a flash of blue light, but the alien was fast, shockingly fast for his size. He sidestepped the attack and swung his massive fist toward Jack's head. Jack ducked just in time. The alien's fist smashed into the stone wall, leaving a crater of shattered rock where Jack's skull would have been. The ground trembled from the sheer force of the blow. Zara's eyes widened, her heart racing. Jack didn't hesitate. He twisted his wrist, and his device released a blast of kinetic energy that struck the alien's chest like a sledgehammer. The brute stumbled backward with a grunt, but he didn't fall. "Nice toy, human," the alien snarled, rolling his shoulders. "But it's gonna take more than that to bring me down." "Good to know," Jack shot back, his eyes gleaming with a fierce intensity. "Because I've got plenty more where that came from." Zora pressed herself against the alley wall, her breathing shallow. She was helpless here, trapped between a merciless bounty hunter and the only man who had ever tried to help her. The alien charged, his arms swinging like battering rams. Jack darted to the side, narrowly avoiding a blow that would have shattered his bones. He raised his device again, but before he could fire, the alien's fist collided with his ribs. Jack flew backward, crashing against the ground with a pained grunt. Zara's gasp caught in her throat. Jack struggled to his feet, clutching his side, but his expression was pure determination. "You're persistent," Jack said through gritted teeth. The alien chuckled darkly. "I'm just getting started." With a roar, the alien charged again, his fists swinging with deadly precision. Jack dodged one blow, then another, but his movements were slowing. The pain in his side was taking its toll. Zara could see it in his eyes, the way he winced with each breath. But still he fought. Still, he refused to give in. "Why are you doing this?" Zara shouted, her voice cracking. "Just run. You can still get away." Jack glanced at her, his gaze unwavering. "And leave you to be dragged back to those slavers? Not a chance." The words hit Zara like a punch to the chest. Why? Why would anyone risk their life for her? Someone they didn't even know. The alien swung again, and Jack barely managed to dodge. But this time, he didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped forward, grabbing something from his belt, a small, sleek cylinder Zara hadn't noticed before. With a quick flick of his wrist, the cylinder extended into a long, sharp-edged baton. Its surface shimmered with electric energy. "All right, big guy," Jack growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Let's finish this." The alien hesitated, his eyes narrowing at the weapon in Jack's hand. But hesitation quickly turned to rage, and he lunged forward, fists raised. Jack moved like water, his baton slicing through the air with precision and power. He ducked under the alien's swing and slammed the electrified weapon into the creature's knee. A howl of agony tore from the alien's throat as his leg buckled. Jack didn't stop. He drove the baton into the alien's side, releasing another surge of energy that sent the brute collapsing to the ground. The alien wheezed, his massive form trembling from pain. His eyes met Jack's, a flicker of fear breaking through his bravado. You can't win," he rasped. "Gorgle will hunt you down. Both of you." "Maybe," Jack replied, his voice like ice, "but you won't be around to see it." He raised his baton, ready to deliver the final blow. But then Zora's voice cut through the silence. "Stop." Jack froze, his gaze snapping toward her. Zara's chest heaved as she stared at the broken creature lying on the ground, the bounty hunter who had tried to kill them. "If you do this," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you'll be just like them. Like Gorgle and his men." Jack's jaw tightened, his knuckles white around the baton. For a moment, his eyes were locked on the alien, his expression torn between rage and something else. Something darker. But then, slowly, he lowered the weapon. "Get out of here," Jack said coldly. "And if I ever see you again, I won't be so merciful." The alien stared at him, shock and disbelief warring on his face. But he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. With a pained groan, he dragged himself to his feet and hobbled away, his heavy footsteps fading into the distance. Zara let out a shaky breath, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. Jack turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You could have gotten us both killed," he said, his tone sharp. "But I didn't," Zara replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "You let him go." Jack looked away, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. "Yeah, well, maybe you're rubbing off on me." Zara couldn't help but smile, even though the danger was far from over. The man who had fought so hard to save her was willing to listen, to change. Maybe he wasn't just another mercenary after all. "Come on," Jack said, nodding for her to follow. "We're running out of time. If we don't reach my ship before Gorgle's men catch up, none of this will matter." Zara nodded, her legs finally obeying her. But as they hurried through the darkened alleyways, a new kind of determination bloomed within her. She wasn't just running for her life anymore. She was running for her freedom. The sun dipped below the jagged skyline, painting the rusted city in shades of crimson and gold. Jack led Zara through a maze of filthy back streets, his movements efficient and unyielding. Every few steps, his eyes flicked over his shoulder, checking for pursuers. They were running out of time, and Zara's exhaustion was catching up with her. "How much further?" she panted, struggling to keep up. "About a mile," Jack replied, his tone clipped. "But it's rough terrain from here. Keep moving." Zara's legs burned, her feet aching from the rough ground, but she pushed on. The rawness of her branded mark throbbed beneath the cloth wrapped around her arm, a cruel reminder of the life she was trying to escape. But as tired as she was, something else gnawed at her even more. "Jack," she said hesitantly, "why are you really helping me?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze remained fixed on the path ahead, his jaw clenched. For a moment, Zara thought he'd ignore her. Finally, he spoke, "Because I know what it's like to be trapped, to feel helpless." She frowned, her curiosity overpowering her fear. "You were a slave." "No," Jack said quickly. "Too quickly. But I've seen what people like Gorgle do to others. They take and destroy everything, just because they can. I couldn't just walk away knowing what they were doing to you." There was more to it. Zara could hear it in his voice. But before she could press him, Jack held up a hand. "Quiet," he whispered. His eyes narrowed as he scanned their surroundings. "We've got company." Zara's blood turned cold. Gorgle's men. Worse. Jack's expression darkened. Enforcers. The enforcers were the private military force Gorgle used to maintain control over the city. Ruthless, well-armed, and entirely without mercy. They emerged from the shadows like specters, 6 of them, armored head to toe in sleek black suits that hummed with hidden technology. Their helmets glowed with crimson visors, their weapons aimed directly at Jack and Zara. "There's a bounty on both of you," the lead enforcer announced, his voice distorted through his helmet speaker. "Dead or alive. I recommend surrendering now and making things easier for yourselves." Jack's eyes gleamed with defiance. "You must be new here if you think I'm the surrendering type." "Then you've chosen death." The enforcer raised his weapon, but Jack was faster. A flash of light erupted from Jack's wrist device, a narrow beam slicing through the air and striking the enforcer's weapon. Sparks flew as the gun exploded in his hands, sending him stumbling backward. "Run," Jack shouted, grabbing Zora's arm and pulling her behind him. They bolted down the nearest alley, Jack's wrist device firing bursts of energy that forced the enforcers to duck and scatter. But Zara could hear the relentless pounding of armored footsteps closing in behind them. "They're not going to stop," Zara choked out, her lungs burning from the effort. "They don't have to," Jack replied grimly. "We just have to be faster." Another blast ripped through the air, and a section of the wall beside Zara exploded in a shower of stone. She yelped and stumbled, nearly falling before Jack caught her and yanked her forward. "You okay?" he asked, concern flashing in his eyes. "I'm fine," Zara lied. The truth was, terror threatened to consume her, but she wouldn't let it. Not now. Not when she had come this far. They dashed through the crumbling ruins of what had once been a thriving city. Zara's legs screamed in protest, her vision swimming. The enforcers were relentless, their shots tearing through the air with a deadly precision. Jack's device continued to fire, but Zara could see the strain in his movements, the desperation in his eyes. Whatever weapon he was using, it had limits, and they were running out of time. Up ahead, Jack barked, pointing toward a jagged rock formation that stretched toward the sky. "There's a tunnel hidden between those rocks. It'll lead us to my ship." Zara nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She forced her legs to keep moving, her feet pounding against the uneven ground. The sound of the enforcer's pursuit was deafening, a nightmare given form. They reached the rocks, Jack practically shoving her into the narrow opening between two jagged slabs. The darkness swallowed them, but Zara could still feel Jack's hand clamped around her wrist, pulling her forward. "Stay low. Keep quiet," Jack whispered. "They'll search the area, but they won't find this place unless we make noise." They crept through the narrow passage, the air thick with dust and the scent of damp earth. The tunnel twisted and turned, a claustrophobic nightmare that seemed to go on forever. Finally, they emerged into a wider chamber, the darkness stretching out like an endless void. And there, at the far end, was Jack's ship. It was a sleek, streamlined vessel, its metallic surface glinting even in the dim light. Zara's eyes widened. She'd seen ships before, of course, but nothing like this. This one looked built for speed, efficiency, and power. "Get in," Jack urged, his voice tight. "Once we're off this rock, we can figure out what to do next." Zara didn't argue. She rushed toward the ship, her heart still thundering in her chest. But just as they were about to board, a sharp, burning pain tore through her leg. She screamed and collapsed to the ground, her hands clutching at the wound. Blood seeped between her fingers, the pain white-hot and merciless. Jack spun around, his eyes going wide with panic. Zara. The enforcers had found them. And now, they were closing in. "Stay with me," Jack said, his voice trembling as he lifted her into his arms. "We're getting out of here. I swear it." He carried her onto the ship, his steps frantic and unsteady. The hatch sealed behind them with a hiss, and Jack practically threw himself into the pilot's seat, his fingers dancing over the controls. The engines roared to life, the ship trembling as it prepared for takeoff. Outside, the enforcers' shouts grew louder, their weapons firing desperately at the hull. But then, with a violent lurch, the ship soared into the sky, leaving the city and its hunters far behind. Zara's vision blurred, pain and exhaustion crashing over her like a tidal wave. But through the haze, she saw Jack's face, his expression torn between relief and guilt. "You saved me," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," Jack said softly, his gaze never leaving her. "But we're not safe yet." The ship hurtled through the darkness of space, the rumble of its engines a steady pulse that vibrated through Zora's bones. Pain still seared through her leg where the enforcer's blast had struck her, but it was dulled now, numbed by a crude bandage Jack had wrapped around the wound. Jack's hands gripped the controls with a precision that bordered on desperation. His eyes flickered between the control panel and the viewport, where the endless void stretched out before them. Zara could see the strain etched across his face, the tension in his clenched jaw. "They'll come after us, won't they?" Zara asked, her voice small and trembling. "They already are," Jack replied. His tone was tight, like a cord pulled to its breaking point. "They'll send ships, trackers, anything Gorgel can afford. Then why did you risk it?" Zara's gaze met his, her eyes searching for something, anything that made sense. "You could have left me. Saved yourself." "I told you before," Jack said, his voice softer now. "I know what it's like to be hunted, and I won't let them do to you what they did to others." She swallowed hard. "You said you weren't a slave." "I wasn't," Jack admitted, "but my family was. Gorgle's men tore apart our colony. They took everything. My parents, my little sister. They weren't so lucky. I managed to escape, but the guilt of leaving them behind, it's like a poison that never leaves." Zara stared at him, her heart twisting painfully. "I'm sorry." Jack shrugged, but his eyes were hollow. "It was a long time ago. I'd spent every day since trying to take down men like Gorgle, helping you. Maybe it's just me trying to make up for what I couldn't do back then." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, but it was different now. Less hostile, more understanding. The console beeped, shattering the fragile quiet. Jack's fingers danced over the controls, his expression darkening. "They found us." "What?" Zara's voice wavered. "Tracking beacons," Jack growled. "They must have tagged us during the fight." Zara's eyes widened. "Can you get rid of them?" "I'm trying." Jack's fingers flew over the panel. "But if I disable them here, it'll trigger a failsafe and give away our location immediately. We need to find a place to land and remove them manually." "Where can we go?" Zara asked, panic clawing at her chest. Jack's gaze narrowed. "There's an old mining outpost a few light years from here, abandoned, but the atmosphere's stable enough to work in. We'll head there." He punched in the coordinates, the ship lurching as it adjusted course. Zara clung to the seat, her breathing shallow. The pain in her leg was flaring again, sharp and unrelenting. Jack noticed her wince. "You need medical attention. Once we land, I'll see what I can do." The journey was short but tense, every beep and flicker of the console making Zara's heart race. When they finally descended onto the barren, rocky landscape of the mining outpost, the ship's engines hummed to a halt, leaving them in oppressive silence. Jack unbuckled himself from the pilot's seat and moved to Zora's side, his hands gentle as he helped her stand. She gritted her teeth against the pain, refusing to show weakness. "Stay here," Jack said firmly. "I need to clear the ship of any trackers before we're swarmed by enforcers. But no arguing. You'll just slow me down in your condition." Zara's cheeks flushed with anger, but she bit back a retort. Jack was right. She was in no shape to help. He disappeared into the bowels of the ship, his footsteps echoing down the metal corridors. Zara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting to the viewport where the desolate planet stretched out before her. Minutes crawled by, each one a fresh torture. Zara's fingers traced the rough cloth wrapped around her arm, her gaze fixed on the branded mark she so desperately wanted to be rid of. Jack returned, his face slick with sweat, but his expression triumphant. "I found 3 trackers. Disabled them all. We should be safe for now." Zara sagged with relief. "Thank you." He nodded, his gaze dropping to her leg. "Now, let's see about that injury." Jack guided her to the medical bay, if it could even be called that. The room was cramped and filled with outdated equipment, but Jack's hands were steady and sure as he cleaned and dressed the wound. The pain eased slightly, replaced by a dull ache that Zara could tolerate. "Why do you care so much?" Zara asked, her voice trembling. "About me. You don't even know me." Jack's eyes met hers, his expression unreadable. "Maybe because you remind me of who I used to be. Lost. Desperate. Fighting for something. Someone. He looked away, his shoulders stiff. "My sister. I couldn't save her. But maybe I can save you." Zara's heart twisted painfully. She had been used to cruelty and indifference for so long. The idea of someone risking everything for her felt impossible. And yet, Jack was here, fighting for her, protecting her. But Zara also knew that their escape was only temporary. Gorgle would not rest until she was found, until she was dragged back to the chain she had fought so hard to break. "What now?" Zara asked. Jack's eyes burned with determination. "Now, we make sure Gorgle never hurts anyone again." The darkness of the mining outpost was suffocating, but to Zara, it was a sanctuary. The cool, stale air filled her lungs, a welcome relief from the stench of blood and fear that clung to her memory. Jack had found them shelter in a crumbling building, its walls cracked and rusted but sturdy enough to offer protection. But safety was a fragile thing, and Zara knew it wouldn't last. "Gorgle won't stop hunting me," Zara murmured, her voice echoing in the hollow silence. Jack was crouched over a makeshift terminal, his fingers flying over the keys with urgent precision. "No, he won't. Not unless we make him stop." "How?" Zara asked, her brow furrowing. "You said he's powerful, that he controls everything." "Power's just an illusion," Jack replied, his gaze never leaving the screen. "Built on fear, on control. If we can take away his leverage, expose his operation, we can bring him down." Zara's heart pounded. "Expose him?" Jack finally looked at her, his eyes fierce and determined. "I've been gathering information on Gorgle for years. Names, transactions, locations, everything. But I could never get close enough to his inner circle to make it count. Until now." "What do you mean?" Zara asked, her throat tight. "He branded you, Zara, like livestock. To him, you're just property." Jack's voice trembled with fury. "But if we can show the universe what he's doing, what he's done to you and countless others, it could be the end of him." Zara's hands trembled. "But won't that just make him angrier? Make him come after us harder?" Jack nodded. "Yes, but if we play this right, he won't have the resources left to find us. The Empire will have no choice but to intervene." The weight of his words settled over her like a crushing stone. It was madness, but it was also the only chance she had to truly be free. "What do I have to do?" Zara asked, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "Tell your story," Jack said. "We'll broadcast it everywhere. The branding, the slavery, everything. We'll make sure no one can ignore what Gorgle's done." Zara hesitated. The thought of laying her pain bare for the universe to see was terrifying, but the alternative was worse. A lifetime of running, of hiding, of being hunted. "I'll do it," Zara whispered. Jack nodded, his expression grim but approving. "Then let's get to work." They spent hours recording Zara's story. She spoke of the chains, the cruelty, the humiliation, the people she had watched suffer and die under Gorgle's rule. Her voice cracked more than once, but Jack's presence kept her anchored, his silent support urging her to continue. When it was done, Zara's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. But there was something else there, too. A flicker of strength, of hope. "Now what?" she asked. "Now, we send this to every news network, every independent channel, every rebel group with a voice," Jack replied. "Once it's out there, Gorgle's empire will start crumbling. And then, we take the fight to him." Zara's eyes widened. "What?" "I told you," Jack said. "I'm not just trying to help you escape. I'm trying to end this. And the only way to do that is to hit Gorgle where it hurts." "But you'll be putting yourself in danger." Jack shrugged. "I was already in danger the moment I took you off that station. At least this way, we stand a chance." The transmission went live a few hours later. Zara's voice echoed through countless screens across the galaxy. Her face, her story, her pain. It was all laid bare for the universe to see. The response was immediate. Outrage, sympathy, calls for justice. And just as Jack had predicted, Gorgle's empire began to tremble. But it wasn't over. Not yet. "We've got to move," Jack said as the ship rumbled to life once more. "Gorgle's going to throw everything he has at us now. But that also means he's vulnerable. He'll be too focused on us to protect himself." "You're planning to confront him." Zara's voice shook, her fingers digging into the worn leather of the co-pilot's seat. "Not just confront him," Jack replied, his eyes blazing with determination. "Destroy him." The ship soared into the darkness, leaving the mining outpost far behind. Zara's pulse raced, adrenaline surging through her veins. "What if we fail?" she asked, her voice a broken whisper. Jack's gaze softened, his hand reaching out to squeeze hers. "Then we'll go down fighting. But we won't fail, Zara. Not this time." The resolve in his voice was enough to steady her own. As the stars streaked past them, Zara knew there was no turning back. The hunter had become the hunted, and she was ready to face whatever came next.